Good afternoon, everyone.
Good
We're
afternoon,
joining a APD news
wanna
conference
provide
to talk
some
about an
additional
officer-involved
information
shooting that
about the
happened
shooting
on
that
Monday.
occurred the early morning of Monday. We've looked at a lot of the evidence, reviewed a lot of the video footage, conducted interviews, so we have a lot better picture today than we did Monday morning. The two involved officers will be providing a statement later today as well as tomorrow, so that information will not be included in what I give to you all here today. I also want to present the information from two different perspectives. The first perspective is the officers that are arriving or responding to the scene. The information that comes in to dispatch doesn't tell the exact story from start to finish, and so it's important for us to understand that as the officers are driving to the scene, what they know and what they perceive and how they're putting this incident in context at the time of the incident. The second perspective is now we have the benefit to look back after an investigation and see what happened before the officers were even called and kind of what transpired before the incident. So what officers knew at the time was they were responding to an incident that was being called in by a clerk at the Circle K, who also later would become a victim in this incident. And the clerk was retreating to the back of the store because a gentleman entered the store with a shotgun. That gentleman is now identified as Damian Dollison, who is also a defendant in a criminal case. Currently, there are 3 charges. They're all felony assault charges. 3 separate victims in this particular case that he has been charged with so far. There may be additional charges as the interviews with the officers take place shortly. As the defendant entered the store, the clerk dialed 911 and retreated to the back of the store. He heard and reported to dispatch that there was 1 shot fired from a shotgun, and so as the officers arrived on scene, that's the basic information that they had. They also had a description of the defendant. They observed the defendant as they came on scene, and as they approached the defendant in their vehicles, a round was fired from the shotgun, and officers returned fire, striking him at least twice. At least that's what we know at this point in time, is striking him twice. So that number may change once we get all the information back. That's the basic information the officers had. Now, the other perspective is kind of the total story. And so what we know prior to the call is that there are 2 males that get involved in a verbal altercation that eventually resulted in both of them pointing firearms at each other. One of them the defendant, and one of them is one of the victims in this case as well. At one point in time, a round was fired from the defendant towards the victim. The victim tried to return fire, but was unsuccessful in returning fire. Then after that occurred is when the defendant went into the store, and kind of that catches up to what the officers knew at the time. So that's the basic facts of the case. I think there's a couple of things that I want to point out, in terms of where we're at with the investigation. First, the responding officers. When officers of the Anchorage Police Department respond to these types of incidents, I think it's important to highlight the courage and the concern they have for public safety and the compressed time that they have to make decisions as they're approaching someone, like in this case, that has a shotgun and fires around. The second thing that I want to highlight is the investigative work that our detectives do. They conduct timely and very thorough investigations, and that's going to lead to a compressed time frame to get declination letters back from Office of Special Prosecution, which will eventually lead to the release of these videos so that the public can get a full picture. The other thing that I want to point out is I think that we can do a better job utilizing our informal leaders and our formal leaders within some of the communities within Anchorage. Some of these leaders are religious leaders or elders within the community, and as a police department, we can do a better job of using their assistance to prevent gun violence. That falls on my shoulders to maintain and continue a focus on establishing a relationship with those type of informal leaders within our community as we move forward. I'll take some questions.
When we were on scene, we saw that there was a patrol car that had multiple gunshots in the windshield. Can you tell us, were those shots of officers firing from their vehicle or vice versa? Or give us some idea what that was about?
Yes, the officer that was driving that vehicle fired rounds through his windshield.
So those are the rounds that struck the suspect from the vehicle, or do you know?
I don't believe so based on the video footage. believe that rounds went through the windshield, officer exited the car and fired a few more rounds, and those rounds probably were the ones that struck. But the initial rounds from that officer were fired through the windshield as he was approaching. Yes, sir.
Did the two gentlemen that were aiming guns at each other, did they know each other in any way?
Doesn't appear so. Yes, ma'am.
Officer Jones was also involved in the fatal shooting of Christopher Handy. What are your thoughts on a single officer being involved in two shootings in such a short period of time?
I have a lot of thoughts on that. The first thing for an officer to be involved in two incidents, significant incidents like this, I always have a concern for just their welfare and mental health. It's a tough thing to go through to be involved in two traumatic incidents like that in a short period of time. So that's concern number one. And then, from an administrative perspective, we do our due diligence in reviewing all these shootings to make sure that all the actions and conduct are appropriate. Yes, sir.
I'm curious, with these 5 shootings in the last couple of months, there's been a call from community members to sort of create a citizen task board to sort of investigate shootings like this. I'm curious, as the chief of police, what's your take on sort of that extra level of citizen accountability?
So right now, we're clearly going through the process of releasing videos and creating a policy and having that be a part of our standard response plan. So as we release videos, I think there's clear communication from the community, from our elected officials, from the media that want that as a piece of accountability. We want to look to see what the officers did so that we can determine and judge for ourselves if their actions were appropriate. And so that's a level of oversight that we have. I think once we accomplish that, then moving into some sort of civilian or citizen oversight or review probably isn't the right time to do it. If you think about it from the officer's perspective, going from one level of oversight to another level of oversight, that can really, kind of hurt the morale and the desire to get up every day and come to work knowing that we just keep stacking these things on top of each other. I'll also say that I think we do have a significant level of public oversight and accountability. This is accountability right here. I've met with all of you in the room before, and I'm committed to have these type of press conferences where you have the opportunity to ask some of these questions and voice your pleasure or displeasure with the police department. We have elected officials that have the opportunity to, call the police department on things that they're not happy about and, bring me up to the podium. I think that over the next 6 months that, we can probably see where this is going to go and how I'm going to do in this role and what information I'm going to provide and see if that's satisfactory. So a little break before we move from, body-worn cameras and releasing footage to civilian oversight, I think is probably a good idea.
And then a follow-up to Tessa's question, I understand the trauma of, an officer being involved in 2 shootings in 2 months, but are you concerned about sort of like the public perception of that as well, that there's an officer who in 2 months shot 2 different people, one of whom died? Are you concerned at all about the sort of perception that could have about, one officer being involved in 2 things? Outside the police department?
Yeah, I definitely have an expectation that there will be public concern for that. That's why we have an obligation to ensure a good and thorough investigation.
How does APD transition officers back into going back on the job after a shooting like this? Is it they just go back to their normal duties right away, or is there like a transition period where they administrative work?
It's a great question. So when our officers are off duty, that's mandatory by policy. They have some activities that they are involved in or required to be involved in, one of which is a mental health review. We want to make sure that they're ready to go back to work, they're healthy, and if that's not the case, then they get additional time off. There's resources that they have available to themselves so that they can prepare themselves to come back to work. And part of that assessment is what job can they come back to? Can they go back and work the patrol division where they came from, where they had a call 5 days earlier that resulted in an officer-involved shooting? And it really is making sure that the officer is prepared to do that job. That's the assessment that takes place.
Our team talked to Greensboro, North Carolina, a city similar in size to Anchorage. They've had 3 shootings this year where we've had 5 in less than 2 months. What are your thoughts on that, and why do you think there's such a difference?
Well, I couldn't tell you what's happening in Greensboro, so I don't know. I don't really know how to assess the difference between the two. We average about 3 officer-involved shootings a year. We almost hit it exactly on 3 every year. So this year is definitely an anomaly. Part of the review process of these officer-involved shootings is to look at the way in which we respond, our tactics, our communication, kind of a thorough look from top to bottom. We're also looking at previous years and training and how that coincides with our officer response. So it's kind of a long-term evaluation that we're going through right now to see if there's any way that we can prepare better or respond different to try to prevent these incidents in the future. I'll take one more question.
About the body-worn camera footage, when we were coming over, we realized that the Assembly has just released its own proposed legislation. And if I may, a couple of the highlights that they are proposing are releasing all of the videos no later than 30 days after their resolution is approved, letting the Handy family look at it, and updating the current policy. I'm wondering if you could update us where your draft policy is in the process, and also comment on any of these things that the Assembly is proposing.
Our policy is about a week out from being released to the public, so we'll have that out soon. And I think they're great suggestions. I think their suggestions reflect some of the desires of the community and some members of the community that had a vocal voice. And I think they're great suggestions. I think you'll be happy.
You've been listening to Anchorage Police Chief Sean Case running through some of the details of what APD said happened this past Monday in the 5th officer-involved shooting in 8 weeks. 3 of those were fatal. This one this past Monday was not. A 51-year-old man, Damian Dollison, was wounded by 2 police officers during a confrontation that involved weapons with another man at a gas station on Bregaw. Some key points that came out today. The chief just moments ago saying that they're still working on APD's policy for releasing body cam video, and he said that policy should be released to the public in about a week. That's been a big point of contention in these previous shootings. Under the previous police chief appointee, she would not release those. Chief Case indicating today that that policy, a revised policy, will be coming out very soon. One thing they talked about, just to fill in the details for you, the names of the 2 officers involved in Monday's police shooting were released today. One of them, Officer Brandon Stack, was hired in June of 2017, and Officer Jacob Jones was hired in December of 2016. Now, the second officer, Officer Jones, was also involved in a fatal officer-involved shooting of Chris Handy on May 13th. Chief Case addressing that, saying first and foremost, he's concerned about the well-being of the officer. He said that's a very tough situation to be involved in 2 of these shootings in a very short amount of time. But he said also from an administrative standpoint, APD needs to make sure that all of its policies and practices were being followed. The chief also talked about trying to foster better relations with community leaders, including those in the religious community, to try to cut down on the number of incidents involving gun violence. So again, a lot of territory covered here. Lauren Maxwell was at that press conference today. She'll have a full recap for us coming up at 5 and 6. And of course, we'll have all the details on alaskasnewssource.com. Thanks so much for joining us.